no reputation, no dignity, and a constant threat of execution just for telling bad jokes. Welcome to life as a medieval court jester in the Holy Roman Empire, where making the emperor laugh was literally a matter of life and death. You might think being the official royal funny man sounds like a cushy gig. Free food, fancy clothes, and all you have to do is crack wise for the nobility. But in the convoluted political maze that was the Holy Roman Empire, which, as Voltaire famously quipped, was neither holy, nor Roman, nor an empire, being a jester was about as secure as dancing on a tightrope over a pit of hungry bears while juggling knives. Blindfolded, in a hurricane, take poor Eberhard Queller, court jester to Emperor Frederick III in the mid-15th century. Eberhard started his day by donning his motley outfit, complete with ass's ears, bells, and a scepter topped with a miniature replica of the emperor's head. The costume wasn't a fashion choice. It was a uniform that marked him as someone outside normal social boundaries, someone who could safely speak uncomfortable truths. Until, of course, he couldn't. "The emperor summons me to breakfast," Eberhard would tell his apprentice, "which means I must entertain him before his first bite, or risk becoming the breakfast myself." Indeed, Frederick III was known for his legendary morning grumpiness and unpredictable temper. One morning, after Eberhard made a mild jest about the emperor's Habsburg jaw, that famously protruding family feature, he found himself locked in the castle privy for 3 days with only turnips to eat. "The emperor wishes me to contemplate the difference between humor and treason," Eberhard explained when finally released, reeking of what can only be described as medieval sanitation at its worst. Apparently, the line is located somewhere in His Majesty's jawline. But bad jokes were the least of a jester's worries. Unlike modern comedians who bomb on stage and live to joke another day, medieval jesters performed for audiences who could literally have them killed for displeasing them. Historical records show that Emperor Maximilian I once threatened to have his jester, Kunz von der Rosen, thrown from the castle walls for a poorly timed jest about imperial finances. Kunz saved himself only by pointing out that he'd prefer to fall from the ground floor window. A quick-witted response that made the emperor laugh and spared his life. The Holy Roman Empire's court was particularly treacherous because it wasn't just one monarch a jester had to please, but an entire ecosystem of power-hungry electors, princes, and nobility, each with their own agendas and painfully thin skins. While the emperor might appreciate a biting satire about the Prince-Bishop of Mainz's corrupt tax collection, that same Prince-Bishop might later ensure the jester had an unfortunate accident involving a steep staircase. "I must remember," Eberhard once sighed, "that while I wear the cap and bells, every noble wears a dagger." Even the jester's living conditions were a cruel joke. Despite entertaining the wealthiest and most powerful men in Europe, jesters often slept in drafty castle corners or even with the dogs. They were fed, yes, but usually the leftover scraps from the nobles' table, after the nobles, their favored courtiers, and even their favorite hunting hounds had taken their share. Gisela Langer, a rare female jester who served Empress Eleanor of Portugal, recalled in her diaries, yes, some jesters were literate, a necessity for crafting clever wordplay, how she once went 3 days without a proper meal because the court was fasting for Lent. "The emperor and his court feast on fish while claiming to fast," she wrote. "Meanwhile, I truly fast because apparently, my immortal soul isn't worth a sardine." The pay was hardly worth the risk. Unlike the standardized salary system we enjoy today, jesters were compensated through an unreliable combination of food, lodging, occasional coins, and the dubious honor of royal favor. This meant that on a practical level, jesters were glorified beggars whose livelihood depended entirely on the whims of their patrons. One particularly humiliating tradition in the Holy Roman Empire was the Feast of Fools, where jesters would compete for coins by performing increasingly dangerous or degrading stunts. Historical records from the court of Emperor Charles IV describe a jester named Wilhelm, who was made to eat an entire pie filled with live frogs while reciting Latin verses backward. He completed the task, received 3 silver coins, and promptly vomited for 2 days afterward. "The coin buys medicine," Eberhard once explained to a curious page. "For the dignity I sacrificed to earn it." Perhaps the cruelest irony was that jesters were expected to mock themselves most of all. Physical deformities were often prerequisites for the job, dwarfism, hunchbacks, or other visible differences made a jester more amusing to the medieval aristocracy. Those without natural advantages would often fake limps or adopt other affected behaviors to seem more foolish. Eberhard, who was actually quite handsome by medieval standards, he had most of his teeth, a rarity, would contort his face and body to appear more grotesque during performances. "I must make myself uglier than the emperor's policies," he once quipped to Gisela, "but not as misshapen as his tax system, and God help the jester who got sick or grew too old to perform." There was no medieval retirement plan, no jester's pension. When Eberhard caught a fever that left him voiceless for a week, the emperor simply replaced him with a dancing bear, which Eberhard later noted had better job security and marginally better hygiene. Historical records show numerous jesters died in poverty after years of service, their patrons having discarded them like worn-out shoes once they no longer amused. The lucky ones might be granted a small cottage on imperial lands. The unlucky simply disappeared from the historical record, presumably having died in ditches or monasteries that took pity on former court entertainers. Yet perhaps the most brutal aspect of a jester's life in the Holy Roman Empire was the cognitive dissonance required. You were simultaneously the lowest and most privileged servant, allowed to speak truth to power one moment, then expected to grovel the next. You lived intimately among the elite of society yet were never truly part of it. You were both invisible and constantly on display. "A jester's mind must split in two," Eberhard once explained to his successor. "Half must carefully observe everything to find the humor in it. The other half must carefully forget everything to avoid the gallows for mentioning it." This mental tightrope walking took its toll. Historical accounts suggest many jesters turned to alcohol or developed what we would now recognize as anxiety disorders. One jester serving Rudolph II was documented as having episodes where he would freeze mid-performance, overcome by terror, before forcing himself to continue with even more manic energy. The political complexities of the Holy Roman Empire made a jester's job even harder. With its patchwork of principalities, duchies, and ecclesiastical territories, jesters had to navigate an absurd maze of regional sensitivities. A joke that killed in Bavaria might get you killed in Bohemia. Mocking the French was acceptable on Mondays, but dangerous on Thursdays if a French envoy was visiting. And God forbid you make light of religious matters during the Reformation, when half the empire was Catholic and half Protestant, and no one could agree on which half was which. Eberhard once made a seemingly innocent jest about indulgences at a banquet, only to find himself threatened with excommunication by a papal legate, execution by an imperial guard, and poisoning by a Lutheran sympathizer, all before dessert was served. Being a jester in the empire, he later reflected while hiding in a wine cellar, is like playing chess against 30 opponents simultaneously, except all the pieces are on fire, and losing means death. Yet for all this misery, there is evidence some jesters genuinely loved aspects of their profession. The freedom to speak uncomfortable truths, the creative outlet for their wit, and yes, even the adrenaline rush of walking that razor's edge between comedy and catastrophe. Gisela's diary entries often reveal a genuine pride in her cleverness. "Today I made the emperor laugh so hard at his own foolishness that he granted 3 petitions he had previously denied," she wrote. "This is the true power of a jester, not the scepter we carry, but the mirror we hold." And perhaps that's the final cruel joke in the life of a Holy Roman Empire court jester. After risking life and dignity to speak truth through humor, most jesters' names and their cleverest jests have been lost to history. While we remember the emperors they served, the wars fought, the cathedrals built, the cutting insights of these professional fools have largely vanished like laughter in the wind. So the next time you bomb a joke at the office, remember Eberhard Queller and count yourself lucky. Your audience might not laugh, but at least they won't have you thrown in a dungeon for it. Though if we're being honest, the Holy Roman Empire's court jesters would probably look at today's political comedians and think, "At least when I made fun of the emperor's policies, I got free room and board. These modern fools do it for likes and retweets." Now that's a punchline that would have killed at court, possibly literally.